So let us begin. We are in week 9, and there are a few quotations here. As you've noticed, I've become thoroughly convinced that there is likely something going on with the ordering, and that it does exhibit some, at least in the Arabic hidden words, it does exhibit a passage through themes, and the fact that there's themes, I think, is pretty undeniable. And the themes may be ordered in some way. Also, there's maybe an argument to be made. We were talking a few weeks ago about how in Baha'u'llah's, as Baha'u'llah says, as he expresses what is essential to all religion, that he starts with the spiritual nature of the human soul, that spiritual light within, that has moral consequences in terms of our deciding whether to embrace and accept that spiritual reality within, or to reject it. And also it has moral consequences for how we relate to others. The fact that others also carry that divine light means that we ought to stand in a certain relationship to others, particularly those who are less fortunate than ourselves. And so these are topics that come early in the Arabic hidden words. So another consequence of this spiritual reality that is ours, that is our heritage, is our moral responsibility towards others, not just to care for the poor, but as Baha'u'llah says, to bear witness or to teach others. And so there's just a few quotations on that, at least in the Arabic hidden words. And as before, I have some collection of quotations more generally on the topic of teaching in the Baha'i faith. What does it mean to teach? What does it mean to bear witness? And I have a few hopefully sufficiently provocative statements to seed our conversation once we've read those. So why don't we first of all read this block of 4 quotations from the Arabic hidden words on this theme, and then proceed from there. O Son of Man, magnify my cause, that I may reveal unto thee the mysteries of my greatness, and shine upon thee with the light of eternity.
O Son of Man, humble thyself before me, that I may graciously visit thee. Arise for the triumph of my cause, that while yet on earth thou mayest obtain the victory.
O Son of Being, make mention of me on my earth, that in my heaven I may remember thee. Thus shall mine eyes and thine be solaced.
O Son of the Throne, thy hearing is my hearing. Hear thou therewith. Thy sight is my sight. Do thou see therewith. That in thine inmost soul thou mayest testify to my exalted sanctity, and I within myself may bear witness unto an exalted station to thee.
It is better to guide one soul than to possess all that is on earth. For as long as that guided soul is under the shadow of the tree of divine unity, he and the one who has guided him will both be recipients of God's tender mercy, whereas possession of earthly things will cease at the time of death. The path to guidance is one of love and compassion, not of force and coercion.
Let your principal concern be to rescue the fallen from the slough of impending extinction, and to help him embrace the ancient faith of God. Your behavior towards your neighbor should be such as to manifest clearly the signs of the one true God. For ye are the first among men to be recreated by his Spirit, the first to adore and bow the knee before him, the first to circle around his throne of glory.
Be not grieved if thou performest it thyself alone. Let God be all sufficient for thee. Commune intimately with his Spirit, and be thou of the thankful. Proclaim the cause of thy Lord unto all who are in the heavens and on earth. Should any man respond to thy call, lay bare before him the pearls of the wisdom of the Lord thy God, which his Spirit hath sent down unto thee. And be thou of them that truly believe. And should anyone reject thine offer, turn thou away from him, and put thy trust and confidence in the Lord thy God, the Lord of all worlds. By the righteousness of God, whoso openeth his lips in this day, and maketh mention of the name of his Lord, the hosts of divine inspiration shall descend upon him from the heaven of my name, the all-knowing, the all-wise. On him shall also descend the concourse on high, each bearing aloft a chalice of pure light.
This is the day in which to speak. It is incumbent upon the people of Baha to strive with the utmost patience and forbearance to guide the peoples of the world to the most great horizon. Every body calleth aloud for a soul. Heavenly souls must needs quicken with the breath of the word of God, the dead bodies with a fresh spirit. Within every word a new spirit is hidden.
The wise are they that speak not, unless they obtain a hearing. Even as the cupbearer who proffereth not his cup till he findeth a seeker.
First, one must teach by deeds, then speak the word. One must become thirsty, then the salubrious water be offered. No matter how delicious the water is, one who is not thirsty will not enjoy it. Therefore, make ye an effort, so that the people may become thirsty, then cause them to quaff from the divine chalice.
These heavenly teachings are the remedy for a sick and suffering world, and a healing balm for the sores on the body of mankind. They are the spirit of life, the ark of salvation, the magnet to draw down eternal glory, the dynamic power to motivate the inner self of man.
Of all the gifts of God, the greatest is the gift of teaching. It draweth us unto the grace of God, and is our first obligation. Of such a gift how can we deprive ourselves? Nay, our lives, our goods, our comforts, our rest, we offer them all as a sacrifice for the Abha beauty, and teach the cause of God.
There is no other aggregation of human beings who can claim to have raised up a system with a demonstrated capacity to unite all of God's children in one world-embracing order. This achievement places us not only in a position of incomparable strength, but more particularly in one of inescapable responsibility. Does not every one of us therefore have a divine obligation to fulfill, a sacred duty to perform towards every other one who is not yet aware of the call of God's latest manifestation? Time does not stop, does not wait. With every passing hour, a fresh affliction strikes at a distracted humanity. Dare we linger?
So the last and obviously longest selection is the text of the address of the Bab to the Letters of the Living, which was delivered in the very first days of the Bab's ministry in 1844, I believe. We probably know the month if I read the Dawnbreakers a little more closely. And since it represents for me the consummate example of calling forth a group of people to go and teach, and it implicitly defines what does it mean to teach. Teaching by deeds, especially being what the Bob emphasizes here, and for me, it's very special. So I look forward to reading this with you. And I love how he quotes extensively from the Bible here as well, and he gives he invokes or evokes Jesus and what Jesus said to his disciples. He says, "You two are doing the same thing," and emphasizing that there's no distinction on a spiritual plane between Christianity and what Baha'u'llah calls this changeless faith of God. Oh, my beloved friends, you are the bearers in the name of God in this day. You have been chosen as the repositories of his mystery. It behooves each one of you to manifest the attributes of God and to exemplify by your deeds and words the signs of his righteousness, his power, and glory. The very members of your body must bear witness to the loftiness of your purpose, the integrity of your life, the reality of your faith, and the exalted character of your devotion. Ponder the words of Jesus addressed to his disciples as he sent them forth to propagate the cause of God. In words such as these, he bade them arise and fulfill their mission.
Ye are even as a fire, which in the darkness of the night has been kindled upon the mountaintop. Let your light shine before the eyes of men. Such must be the purity of your character and the degree of your renunciation, that the people of the earth may through you recognize and be drawn closer to the Heavenly Father, who is the source of purity and grace. For none has seen the Father who is in heaven. You, who are his spiritual children, must by your deeds exemplify his virtues and witness to his glory. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt have lost its savor, wherewith shall it be salted? Such must be the degree of your detachment, that into whatever city you enter to proclaim and teach the cause of God, you should in no wise expect either meat or reward from its people. Nay, when you depart out of that city, you should shake the dust from off your feet. As you have entered it pure and undefiled, so must you depart from that city. For verily I say, the Heavenly Father is ever with you and keeps watch over you. If you be faithful to him, he will assuredly deliver into your hands all the treasures of the earth, and will exalt you above all the rulers and kings of the world.
O my letters, verily I say, immensely exalted it is this day above the day of the apostles of old. Immeasurable is the difference. You are the witnesses of the dawn of the promised day of God. You are the partakers of the mystic chalice of his revelation. Gird up the loins of endeavor and be mindful of the words of God as revealed in his book. Lo, the Lord of thy God is come, and with him is the company of his angels arrayed before him. Purge your hearts of worldly desires, and let angelic virtues be your adorning. Strive that by your deeds you may bear witness to the truth of these words of God, and beware lest by turning back he may change you for another people, who shall not be your like, and who shall take from you the kingdom of old.
The days when idol worship was deemed sufficient are ended. The time is come when naught but the purest motive, supported by deeds of stainless purity, can ascend to the throne of the Most High and be acceptable unto him. The good word riseth up unto him, and the righteous deed will cause it to be exalted before him. You are the lowly, of whom God has thus spoken in his book. And we desire to show favor to those who were brought low in the land, and to make them spiritual leaders among men, and to make them our heirs. You have been called to this station. You will attain to it only if you arise to trample beneath your feet every earthly desire and endeavor to become those honored servants of his who speak not till he has spoken and who do his bidding.
You are the first letters that have been generated from the primal point, the first springs that have welled out from the source of this revelation. Beseech the Lord your God to grant that no earthly entanglements, no worldly affections, no ephemeral pursuits may tarnish the purity or embitter the sweetness of that grace which flows through you.
I am preparing you for the advent of a mighty day. Exert your utmost endeavor that, in the world to come, I, who am now instructing you, may, before the mercy seat of God, rejoice in your deeds and glory in your achievements. The secret of the day that is to come is now concealed. It can neither be divulged nor estimated. The newly born babe of that day excels the wisest and most venerable men of this time. And the lowliest and most unlearned of that period shall surpass in understanding the most erudite and accomplished divines of this age. Scattered throughout the length and breadth of this land, and with steadfast feet and sanctified hearts, prepare the way for his coming.
Heed not your weakness and frailty. Fix your gaze upon the invincible power of the Lord your God, the Almighty. Has he not in past days caused Abraham, in spite of his seeming helplessness, to triumph over the forces of Nimrod? Has he not enabled Moses, whose staff was his only companion, to vanquish Pharaoh and his hosts? Has he not established the ascendancy of Jesus, poor and lowly as he was in the eyes of men, over the combined forces of the Jewish people? Has he not subjected the barbarous and militant tribes of Arabia to the holy and transforming discipline of Muhammad, his prophet?
Arise in his name, put your trust wholly in him, and be assured of ultimate victory.
So why is teaching a moral imperative?
Could I ask a question?
Yeah.
Before we get into that, the second paragraph in this section, where he seems to be quoting Jesus.
Yes.
Ye are even as the fire. So I know there are pieces of that
Yes.
I recognize from the gospel, but it seems like he's adding some things in
Yeah.
between.
He says in words such as these.
Okay.
I know, I myself wondered, because the Dawnbreakers was translated and edited by Shoghi Effendi based on the manuscript of Nabil's narrative, and I remember reading this going, this has to be Shoghi Effendi. It's like Shoghi Effendi had to have like edited this and like made it, because it's so beautiful and it's so lovely. But it was my privilege in Haifa actually to spend a great deal of time with the original text of the Dawnbreakers, and one of the first things I did when I had my hands on the text was check this passage and see how close how close is the version that Shoghi Effendi delivered to us, how close is it to the original text of Nabil's narrative? And I found in this particular speech, it was very close. So this is pretty much word for word how Nabil writes it down. But then the question becomes, how did Nabil know? Because Nabil was not there when the Bab gave this address to the Letters of the Living. Nabil wasn't one of the Letters of the Living. He came along a number of years later. So how could he have known what was his source for the content of that speech, and to know how much of the words of Jesus the Bab was quoting and how much of it was... and I don't know the answer to that. But
So it wasn't written? I always assumed that this was written down and then sent, because weren't the Letters of the Living like spread out all over Persia?
This is what he addressed before he did that.
So at this point, he had only sent out one letter. It was Mullah Ali Bastami. He had sent him out. And so the remainder were still... This was the one time, I think, in the early history of the Babi cause when all of the Bab's disciples were there in one place. It was before he scattered them.
So they were all there in
So
Shiraz.
they're all there except for Mullah Ali in Shiraz, and that's when he gave this address.
Okay.
So
Somebody must have written it down.
it's just so incredible. I don't know if someone wrote it down, but then Nabil in the narrative would usually relate, when he gets to a part where he's relating specific tract of text that relies on a primary source, he would usually relate who that primary source was. And Nabil was an early enough believer to have met several of the Letters of the Living, to have, he was kind of there on the scene early on, but not that early. It's certainly possible that he had interviewed Letters of the Living to get this information, but he doesn't specify, at least at this juncture, where exactly the source came from. Which is an interesting question to me, because it's such an important text. And
Just to be clear, the Letters of the Living are people.
yes, so those were the first 19 of the Bab's disciples.
Well,
And they
19, because they included himself as the
Wasn't he
19th.
the 19?
was he the 9th or was he the 20th?
Baha'u'llah was also the 20th.
Was Baha'u'llah the 20th? So it was 18 plus him became 19. Letters of the Living, Hurufa Hai, is the name of, and
Of 18, yeah.
yeah, because Hai, the Bab really liked converting words into numbers, because there's a number word correspondence, which is also in the Hebrew, and a lot of scholars of the Old Testament use exactly the same abjad, A, B, J, D, and it's actually the same. It's the same ordering of the alphabet in the Hebrew as it is traditionally, at least in the Arabic, as it is in the ancient Phoenician, from which they both derive. But so there's a long tradition in multiple cultures of taking words and translating them into numerical values. So the Bab calls his first disciples the Letters of the Living, and the numerical value of the word living, is it not? Do I have that right? Is it
1
19?
plus 8 is 9.
Yeah.
And 9 is the unity, and also is
Well, Ya is 10 and Ha is 9, so I think it's 19.
well, he had to have 18 disciples come to him on
8. So the Hejimi, which is the H in Huruf al-Hai, has a numerical value of 8, and Ye has a numerical value of 10. So the Letters of the Living adds up to 18. So that's actually the number of his disciples, plus the Bab becomes 19, and 19, the number 19 is equivalent to the word Vahed. It's funny how there's just so many number-letter correlations. It's kind of a side point, I guess, in a way, but it's a neat little rabbit hole to get down into.
What is Vahed?
So a Vahed is a group of 19, and the numerical value of Vahed happens to be 19 as well, because V is 6, H is 8, and D is 4. Does that add up?
18.
That adds up to 18.
6 and 4.
Oh, and then Aleph is 1, so there you get your 19. Yeah, because Vahed has a long Aleph. So it neatly adds up to 19, which is why there are 19 months in the Baha'i year and 19 days in each month, which gives 361, which is the Baha'i calendar is based on it, 19 months of 19 days, and then to fill in the space, you have these 3 intercalation days, so that it adds up to 365, which has its roots in a way, in this speech, because those were the original 19 followers of the Bab had such significance that the number 19 is found in a lot of places.
I was just thinking, Tagore wasn't there, was she?
She was one of the letters of the living.
I know.
No, she wasn't.
But she wasn't able
physically
to
present.
attend.
She might have been there in
Because they
attendance.
just met in a dream.
That's right. Yeah.
And she wasn't able to.
Yeah. So it would have been the 18 minus Mullah Ali Bastami minus Tahare. I don't know if Qudus was there on the scene, but he was also one of the latest ones.
He was the last one.
The last one, yeah.
Yeah, I always remember that because I think it was. I always, when I was a kid, I thought his name was Caboose.
Oh, the last one. Got it. I see what you
Good.
did there.
That's good.
So there's a talk given, just to boil this down from my very rudimentary head that's getting into this stuff. The Bab is there speaking to 18 people.
Right.
16.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
It's addressing 18, of which 16 are present in the room with him. Yeah.
And so someone is amanuensis writing this down.
That's kind of the open question, is that who wrote this down, or was it just memorized on the spot and then later related to Nabil, who then put it in his history? But he didn't write the history down until 1889 or 1890, and so there was already a gap of several decades in which we don't at least have a I would have seen it because I was tracking down all these bits and pieces when I was in Haifa and had access, and I would have seen it. There's a bit of paper that would have linked that that 1800s, that mid 1800s to Nabil's time. Which
so was Nabil among these?
he was not among them,
Okay.
but he had met Letters of the Living. He was an early enough believer to have met Letters of the Living, from whom he got, I think, a fair portion of the details of these early years of the history of the faith. So presumably he got that whole speech from one of the Letters of the Living, and normally, which is, I guess, not that important to us. It's more of a historical footnote. But for Baha'is, we put such emphasis on having the authenticated, signed, and sealed words to know that this is word for word what the author intended. We don't have that in this case. We have what must have been a recollection that was written down some years later.
Yeah, but it's included in the history book, which is not necessarily one part of the sacred writings, but it's certainly in a history book.
Well, and it was
And the
approved by
Dawn
Baha'u'llah, right?
And it was
The
approved in
was
substance
approved
by Baha'u'llah. Yeah, the work was commissioned by Baha'u'llah in the late 1880s, and Nabil undertook the writing of it over about a 2-year period, and submitted the drafts to Baha'u'llah. As he was writing it, he was actually writing it in Haifa, so he was in the presence of Baha'u'llah when he was writing it, or in the vicinity, and so Baha'u'llah had a chance to read the drafts and make comments, the precise nature of which are not known, but the final product presumably was approved by Baha'u'llah. Although that itself is also a really interesting and probably too deep of a rabbit hole to get into. The extent to which Baha'u'llah had any lingering reservations about the content of the history is somewhat of an open question. Because Nabil was a little bit prone to exaggeration, a little bit prone to taking miracle stories and putting them into the narrative.
Baha'u'llah threw those out.
And Baha'u'llah did not want the miracle stories in there. And so they were And there were a few in the.
But there's still some miracle stories in there.
There's a few that are still there. I mean, most notably the one of the execution of the Bab. But that was reported in the newspapers these days. So there's something actually happened there.
Wow.
But there are many other miracle stories in the manuscript of Nabil's narrative that were left out when Shoghi Effendi made his redacted and edited translation of it. And it's interesting to actually compare the two and see what got dropped. And there's quite a number of very interesting miracle stories and fun ones.
Thank you. I didn't mean that.
Yeah.
But it's a little rabbit
That's
hole.
pretty interesting rabbit hole.
It is interesting, yeah.
Regardless, this address is so inspiring. I mean, it has
amazing, yeah.
essential directions on how to teach.
And he's not talking about give the logical proofs, convince them by your argument. It's all teach by who you are.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is, to me, comes across really powerfully.
And let that, but it's also not just do it by living. It's that is what will open a heart to ask questions, you know, because and then you respond. You when you find a hearer, then you speak. So it's not just living. It says to speak, but to wait until you have a hearer. How do you get a hearer is your life and your actions, and finding a soul that is is curious, is searching. You know, you find those who are in a state of search. You know, so.
And what is the content of teaching? Is it the information that you're conveying? So and so came, and this year he said this, and then he said this, and then now we're supposed to do this. Is that primarily what teaching? Is this a false dichotomy? The question, is it conveying information, or is it passing on a flame? It's like there's a flame that's lit in the heart, and the real teaching is passing that flame on into another soul.
There's a beautiful description of it by Abdu'l-Baha in Memorials of the Faithful. You familiar with what I'm talking about? He's talking about a believer who was such a great teacher of the class. And he's in this Memorials of the Faith was a collection of basically Abdu'l-Baha's eulogies for believers, early believers that were collected. And so this, I can't remember if you had that, which particular believer this was, but he was this wonderful teacher of the cause. And then he tells about having a dream about seeing him in the next world. And he talks about it because he was apparently known for liking food, and he was rather rotund. And so he described him being so happy, and he's rotund in the next world too. And and he's describing how this gentleman is teaching in the next world. And he says, in the next world, he said, teaching is spreading the fragrances of holiness. That is what, and he said, that is what teaching is, in the next. And I always thought that's that idea of spreading the fragrances of the holy words of God.
It's everywhere. It's the first work of the Babs. The first book that he wrote after his declaration was a commentary on the Surah of Joseph, known in the Quran also. There's a surah in the Quran, which is the story of Joseph, which largely repeats the story of Joseph from the Old Testament, from the book of Genesis, but adds some details, drops some details. But both Baha'u'llah and the Bab and Abdu'l-Baha focus on in this story of Joseph is a little detail that appears at the end of the story in the Old Testament, which is the fragrance of the shirt of Joseph, where he's in he has his coat of many colors, but that's torn up by the wolves. Later on in Egypt, when he wants to, I might get the details wrong, but when he wants to give news of his survival and existence to his father, Jacob, who's still living in the Holy Land, he sends his shirt with his brothers, because his brothers come don't recognize Joseph at first. They're begging for food because there's a famine in the land. Joseph sends his brothers back to the Holy Land with his shirt as proof of his existence, because Jacob at this point, who was blind, could still smell the fragrance, smell the fragrance of his son from the shirt. And the symbolism of that is like deeply resonant for the Bab, who writes about, for Baha'u'llah, very often describes himself as that long lost Joseph. And part of the depth of the metaphor is that Joseph is way off in Egypt, but his presence is still known to us here in Israel by the fragrance of the shirt. And so it's partly a metaphor of how the spiritual reality can be distant physically, but yet because of its power and its influence can still affect us, on the other side of the world. At least that's one of the sort of resonances, I think, of the metaphor. So, and Abdu'l-Baha uses it also a lot, and anyone named Yusef, when people would write to Abdu'l-Baha, and I could see, this is a little slight digression, but at the moment I have this project of reading all the first lines of the tablets, and that are in the public domain. There's around 20,000 in the public domain. So I'm reading these first lines, and for Abdu'l-Baha's tablets there was around 10,000, and most of these have never been translated before. So I'm using ChatGPT-4 because it speeds it up, and I'm reading these things in translation. And it's so delightful how when everyone would write to Abdu'l-Baha, if their name was John, Yohana or something, he would just say, "Oh, Yohana," and then he would find some connection to some historical person whose name was John, and say, the John of old was like this, and you two are like this. If it's Joseph, he's like, of course he's going to use, talk about the fragrance of the Joseph and the shirt of Joseph. If it was Rostam, he would talk about the great Rostam, who was one of the warriors of ancient Persia, and it's just it's very sweet to read that. Anyway,
isn't it in the Tablet of the True Believer? Am I right? In the Agon, when Baha'u'llah talks about how
yes,
the seeker will, even though he be like in the
the
west,
uttermost ends of the west,
he will recognize the fragrance. Isn't there something about the
yes,
fragrance?
even though he be dwelling on the farthest reaches of the east,
that made me think of.
That fragrance is going to be detectable.
Yeah.
There's something about the spiritual fragrances which know no boundary of space and time. They are ever fresh and powerful.
Well, it's a neat metaphor also when you think about the way that a smell can instantly take you back. You're there. Yeah.
Yeah, it reaches a deeper part of the brain.
Part of the brain that just relives a moment.
Yeah.
Peeling oranges is one for me.
Yeah.
That brings me, on pilgrimage. I was sitting on the steps somewhere where I was peeling an orange, and so when I smell oranges, oh my, forever being there. Yeah.
Among the Baha'i properties in Israel were whole orange groves, and the family of the staff during orange harvest season would sometimes be invited to help harvest the oranges or the olives, as the case may be. So you would spend a lovely day in the vicinity of one of the holy places, picking oranges from the trees and heaping them up in big buckets. Yeah, great memories. So another question that came to my mind when reading these is how does one avoid, in this day and age, when there are so many people selling you something? There's so many people, and they could be selling you a product to buy, or they could be selling you enlightenment. And there's so much, I think, hidden agendas in the information we're getting. and there's so much, I think, wholly justified suspicion of anyone who comes with something that sounds too good to be true. And how does one approach that reality of believing that one is in possession of something infinitely precious, and that's truly all that one wants to do is share that, but it is treated with such suspicion, and one's motives are so often called into doubt.
Well, I think this quote about the purity is essential, and especially now, where in his address he talks about putting that detachment and putting any attachment to the world, and he's talking about, and when you leave, it has to be, you entered it pure, you have to exit pure, so you're not gaining anything for yourself. It has to be totally selfless. It's not for you to be getting credit or anything like that. I got to get a quota. I got to heck so many people. It's none of those things have anything to do with Baha'i teaching. It's the purity in which you share it without any hint of something for yourself. It's got to be simply of service to the hearer. Answer their question. Give them what they need, and not in any way try and take on the techniques of being a huckster or, all this other kind of stuff with salesmanship. That's not how you teach the faith.
Which paragraph is the one on purity?
The what?
The paragraph
Top of
on
the second
purity.
page.
Top of the second
The
page.
second sentence starts, "The times come when not with the purest motive."
Yeah. The last page there, the top paragraph.
Well, yeah.
Supported by deeds of stainless purity. Purest motive, stainless purity.
Oh, I see. Okay.
That last sentence, trample beneath your feet every earthly desire and endeavor to become those honored servants of his who speak not until he has spoken.
Well, and I think we have to be careful too that we don't actually have a hidden agenda.
Yeah.
Are we befriending someone just in hopes that that they might become a Baha'i, or, but rather than just really being, pure love to everyone no matter what. And then if someone is interested and attracted to the faith, answer their questions, I think. But because people will see through it, if you're not really sincere.
Yeah.
Educare, the Latin term means to bring out. And so education is based on educare, it's bringing out things in others. So you're not even thinking of bringing out something from within yourself. It's what is it that person, God, if God is within them, then there's nothing you really have to do except let them be their fullest self, their fully realized and fulfilled self. That's really your only job. Not even a job, it's not.
Privilege.
Yeah.
As a teacher, that's what you do.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is a good analogy, but if you love a piece of music, just love a piece of music, or love a particular band, and you want to share that with someone, then how do you go about doing it? You just share the music with them, and you can't force them to like it the same way you like it. And you're not sharing with them so that they go buy the album, right? You're not that's not the end product in mind, is that they go and purchase the album themselves, or they go and... The whole purpose in mind is that they experience some of the joy that you experience when you hear that music.
And if 20 years later you're still playing the same song for your wife, hoping that she will come around, let it go. Just let it go.
Now there must be a story behind that.
Yes, but haven't you ever had the experience that, like you're describing, where someone that you know is just so excited about a movie or a song?
K-drama set.
Well, yes, exactly. And so, okay, but your experience with it is enhanced by the things that person is, telling you why they love it. What is it that that they love about it? And so then when you encounter it, I guess what I'm trying to say is that spark is part of the experience, that we can convey, and that if people see that in us, then that might make them more inclined to want to know more. What. And you probably had that experience too, where when someone asks you, why, what is being a Baha'i done for you? Like what is it you love about being a Baha'i? And I mean, what a great question.
Well, does he and the one who hath guided him will both be recipients of God's tender mercy? So that's probably a little bit of that.
Can I ask something that's a little bit off the wall? And if it's a rabbit hole, just tell me and we can just climb right back out. One thing that just jumped to mind is, I don't remember which of the Socratic dialogues this was, but there's this wonderful story where there's a little slave boy.
The Meno.
Thank you. And here's this uneducated little boy. He's a slave, for heaven's sake. And Socrates talks to him and talks to him and talks to him, and eventually gets him to prove the Pythagorean theorem. So
the point being, he already knew the Pythagorean theorem, and he's just reminding him of what he already knew.
Well, and there's a process between these two human beings that is actually transcending the sort of accidental humanness of this little fellow has brown hair and this little fellow has no hair, probably Socrates, or whatever. But the truth is so much deeper than the features of either one, but it's this extraordinary process of the truth kind of outing itself in the presence of all of these astonished bystanders who revere Socrates and think this little kid is an idiot. And look what happens. And the reason that comes to mind is I'm wondering, I don't know if Baha'is consider Socrates to have been a manifestation. I won't even go there, talk about another man, rock and roll. But if in fact, truth and beauty and virtue are all one for Socrates, and this phenomenon is happening in this social context of these two people having a conversation, and it's a kind of a resonance, and it's also a kind of an affirmation of the deepest unity you can get. This little worthless kid is erupting with truth. So I'm just wondering if part of what this is, what question I'm just puzzling over, is that whatever the truth is that's invested, we talked at the very beginning of our study of the Hidden Words, human beings are this extraordinary divine gem, each one unique. And so at some level the process of teaching, it seems, might be God sort of crafting a way of both being virtuous and pure and self-effacing, all for the purpose of having the person who listens suddenly discover that God is happening here. Just like the truth of the Pythagorean theorem was happening because of something that's passing between them that's deeper. And so of course each gem is unique, every human being is unique, so it's not like the Pythagorean theorem, which is a specific intellectual concept, but God is unity, and every single person who has the blessing of someone who actually has somehow been touched by the heart of God, the manifestation of God, is going to find a way through the grace of God, if there's purity there, that will have this other person who's listening come alive in a way that could never otherwise have been possible for that person. And you know, is it something like this? I mean, it's not I'm not sure how the slave boy smelled at the time, and I know smell is a big deal for Baha'u'llah.
He had the real fragrance.
How do you sort of transpose from one frame of metaphor to another frame of metaphor? There's some kind of a resonance happening that's about the affirmation of the unity of God. I mean, is that?
That's a wonderful way of putting it. I think Socrates himself said regarding all these dialogues and all these conversations he had that he never thought of himself as I'm the one containing knowledge and I'm passing it on to you. He saw himself rather as a midwife. It's like, I'm here to assist in the birth, in the birthing process, and you're the one having the baby, and I'm just here to sort of help that process along.
And that sounds like educare to me.
Yeah, because what I got from that story is the child who's enslaved is just as knowledgeable and just as has what it is that's required within him already.
Right.
And Socrates might have had the gift or whatever to bring it out, but it was already there.
Right.
And so it wasn't, to me, it was more about the child who's enslaved as opposed to the Socrates gift. It was, the point was that regardless of your station in life and this earthly plane, everyone has the ability to have knowledge of the Pythagorean theorem, I guess.
Love that theory.
Of course we do.
Of course you do, Kim.
We actually did. We did use it the other day in a parking lot.
Nice.
We needed to cross.
We did.
We needed a shortcut. It was raining, and Jasmine said, "Finally, the Pythagorean theorem becomes relevant."
But I mean, there's something mystical that's happening here, and I feel like that's kind of, there was something that, Socrates was getting at, and there's something
Yeah.
how do you become, ultimately, I guess what I'm hearing here is that at some level, if your purity if you're close enough to being really submissive to what the manifestation is calling you to be in the way you live your life, and then you're proximate to another human and cherishing them and seeing them through God's eyes, and you have something to say to them, they can't do without it. Not because you're something special, but because this process of God moving through one human to the God in another human is a sort of a mystical event that's happening right there. And that maybe is what it means to teach the faith.
You got the example of Abdu'l-Baha and how he taught too.
Yeah.
And the basic is one phrase about, magnify my cause that I may reveal unto thee the mysteries of my greatness and shine upon thee. And the second one, humble thyself before me that I may graciously visit thee. So on. And it would be, there's so many stories about Abdu'l-Baha meeting somebody and his purity and his attention and focus on what does this person need to hear. He would ask a question that would just open the heart of the person, and it would just be just like the story of Fred Mortensen, who visited, he was a poor guy, he was like a homeless guy, couldn't afford travel, but he hopped the rails, really a hard kind of a trip where you're clinging to the bottom carriage of a freight train, and he's going from, from Ohio or someplace like that to where Abdu'l-Baha was in New
I thought it was
Hampshire or
the East
someplace.
Coast, yeah.
Yeah, long trip. And he comes and he's disheveled and so on, and Abdu'l-Baha just looks at him and says, "How was your trip?" Just, the simple thing, man. And then Abdu'l-Baha just picks him up and just hugs him. And so he just like knew the soul,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
was that kind of thing that you just humble yourself and then you say, just let me say the right thing. I think of the examples of like Martha Root talked about. She didn't take notes. She didn't prepare a talk. She said, well, I don't know what this, she would pray. That was her preparation for she gave all these public talks, and her preparation was she would pray and ask that God would guide her in whatever she spoke, And she wouldn't know what she was going to say before she got up there and started saying it. But she felt, until she said, I won't speak until I feel moved to, that I'm speaking for God. And that process, I've seen many Baha'i speakers talked about doing that, following that kind of example. He said, how do I know what to say? Because I don't know who my hearers are yet.
Yeah.
But then, of course, the proof is in the pudding. In that, how did they respond? Did they step back and say, "Oh gosh, what is this all about?" Or did they go, "Wow, I guess we need to hear from them"?
But the Queen of Romania seemed okay.
Yeah.
She was one of the ones who.
Yeah.
Martha,
is that right?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, she managed to get an audience with her a lot.
Queen Marie, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Came about it. Yeah. Another example of Abdu'l-Baha showing rather than telling, in this case, how not to teach, was recorded in the Pilgrim Notes of Georgia Ralston, and this happened in 1912, hot day in August. Abdu'l-Baha is asked to go to a picnic and to teach a group of people, and he goes to the end of the subway, walks all the way past the end of the subway to this park. Everyone's dripping with sweat. He reaches the park, and the group that he's been asked to teach is on the other side of the park, dancing and having a good time. And the person who invited Abdu'l-Baha to do this goes to Abdu'l-Baha and says, please come and teach them. And Abdu'l-Baha says, they have to come to me. It's this principle of,
Thirst.
there has to be thirst. They have to come to me. And so the person goes over to them and tries to convince them to come to Abdu'l-Baha to receive the teaching. And they're like, no, let Abdu'l-Baha come to us. And the person comes back and says, they want you to come to, says no, they want you to go over there. And Abdu'l-Baha says to him, I have come this far and now I'm going home. And he turns around and he goes all the way back. And that was the end of the story.
Yeah.
But if there isn't a thirst, then there's no point. Even if you're Abdu'l-Baha.
A little like getting the dust off his shoes, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, and the question of how they respond maybe isn't even important, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there is somewhere in here, it's if it's not in here,
Use them to
somewhere else.
themselves.
If they accept it, great. If not, then you shake the dust off your feet, and go to the next place.
Taylor Swift got
It
it.
isn't important. I was thinking the proof is in the pudding. That's not the right attitude.
You shake it.
Because then it's on them. It's up to them. I mean, not that we don't want to try to get better at what we do, but we can't force anyone to recognize or believe or agree.
Yeah.
Looks like the process is as important as the outcome, or more so, in terms of what our actions are. The behavior that I need to be in, and the state of being that I need to be in. That's so much more important than what happens with that person, and then that's up to them. It's left in their heart as to how they respond. But really, the benefit that we receive, as a teacher, is humbling ourselves, and then we are filled with God's mercy, so we're getting quite a bit out of the whole, and that's the point of it for us, I think. For me, to receive that. So if you're doing it right, I guess you're gonna get some good, spiritual juice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why we do it, right? For the reward.
Well, that's certainly not.
Certainly not for the punishment.
But it's not the reward of the outcome.
No.
It's not.
Right.
It's
Right.
not.
No, but the benefit is to the hearer. Abdul Baha talks about that. 90% of the benefit is to the hearer, is to the teacher.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh. The teacher is the speaker, not the hearer.
Well, and
I meant the
you don't
teacher.
even know
Oh,
what the
oh,
results are. When I think about how many people took some kind of action that ultimately assisted me in my path, they never knew
Yeah.
what happened later on, unless I happened to meet them and somehow they figured it out. There's there was a whole assembly in Chico that made arrangements for the Seals and Crofts to come and give their talk and everything. They never knew that somebody ultimately became a Baha'i out of that, and lots of people. So you just never know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This conversation reminds me of my role as a sponsor in Alcoholics Anonymous. And, being a sponsor is just being a friend, going through the process and helping people learn the spiritual principles and so forth. And I had a sponsee a couple years ago who was very fearful she was going to relapse and go back to drinking. And I was talking with my sponsor about, how do I do this? And she was like, get out of the way. Their higher power is in charge of their path. You have shared. You're available. Let go of the outcome.
That's part of the shaking the dust. What that does is desires
Right.
that. Oh, I taught somebody to faith. Oh, that has to be the dust you shake off. If you said something that helped somebody else on their path, that's fine. But you don't collect all these brownie points and put them in a jar that when you go to the Outlaw Kingdom, it's like,
Yeah.
no.
Well, but it doesn't have to be that sort of selfish, does it, Roger? I mean, I think somebody could. I really, really want this person, not so that I can do such and such, but because I just really feel like they're suffering. They need enlightenment, and I'm trying to be a prism for God's light into their life, and I can blow it very easily, and I may and probably will, but it's not about me ultimately. It's about a larger process. And so, I guess what's actually kind of edifying to me about this is I'm reading through this Baha'i book about Abdul Baha, and I am utterly astonished about all the people who have heard the truth of God, who turn into just monsters. I'm sorry, but this Yahya and that Muhammad, and people are doing horrible things, and they've just had the Bab or Baha'u'llah speak to them, and yet it's almost like it's right off their, deflected right off of whatever it is that's the hard-shelled surface on their souls. Yeah. And there's a part of me, I suppose, that's thought that evangelization, which is kind of the Christian word for this, is about knowing that God is knocking at the door and yearns deeply to have everyone turn and see and be saved, not in some crude way, but to actually have their life filled with God. And that kind of is what a lot of the spreading of the faith is about. But then you come up against this wall that says, whether it's dusting off your feet or whatever, the person doesn't want to listen. And it's just so hard to believe that it can be the truth if they're so inured to receiving it. And that's really hard to get your head around.
Yeah. It's not being indifferent to people, but caring for them, but it's the deep respect for the independent investigation of truth. That their own heart has to do it, and you have to give that great respect
Right.
Because if they, outwardly seem to do it to please you, I mean, that'd be one thing. That so when I got married, that was one of her. See, I had to convince her that she didn't have to become a Baha'i to marry me. That my love for her is independent of that. And I respected her independent investigation. She has her own spiritual path. I can't. So don't do it because you want to please me. It has, because that, it's, I can be there to answer questions, and I would, but it's not, the faith has to come from within, from every individual.
Right.
Otherwise it doesn't mean anything. It's done for external reasons.
The danger I guess I see in using our own, even our own heart, it may be our mind, it may be our heart, to decide, oh, that person needs this. And so if we do that, we may be missing what God's intention is, and we may then decide to not speak to that person because, they seem fine. And that may be the person that really, God wants us to teach. Plus, if we're doing that, we're not embodying those spiritual values and verities that you need to inhabit. We're only turning them on and off, and really, if we're being that light, we should be that for everyone, right. And therefore, when we will hopefully, I have to remember to be able to be kind to everyone. It's not something that I go, this is one of those times when I need to be kind. I just need to be kind. I need to be a kind
Said the teacher at the front of the room.
So I guess that's one of those reasons where that purity of motive even gets down to the point of, it's not that it's a bad thing to be kind to somebody and on purpose. It's simply that I think we can even reach a higher level of just trying to become humble and trying to become this spiritual light for anyone, because that is who you become, that's who you are, as opposed to that is who I'm going to be for the moment or
Thank you.
I'm reminded of my days of early conversion, my Jesus freak days in my 19, 20, 21, 22, and being so persuaded by the Pentecostal fervor of the church that I was a member of, that it felt like that was my only job, was to convince somebody to accept Christ. And it was like, if I don't do this, they're probably going to go to hell. I have to do that, And the difference that and there's quotes that I would read and, as justification, go into all the world and all of that kind of stuff. But I don't know, there's something about what we're talking about that elevates our nobility. That is our nobility. Rather than, I know the truth, and you, poor soul, you don't know the truth. That if we do all have this, like you were talking about, we have this within us. I don't know, there's just something really tender and true and real about this perspective of teaching that's touching me.
It almost sounds like this is one of the deepest ways of being detached. That at some level, as alive as I may be with a conviction that I found the truth, I have to let that go. And let God be God in whatever way He's going to use me, as a klutz or hopeful, helpful, whatever, and to whomever is out there listening or not. And then just having done my best, I just walk away not needing. I guess that's part of what this is about. Is that when you're talking about needing to be something, that smells like you need detachment, bro.
In a stick, roll-on, or aerosol spray.
Like Abdul Baha's friend sweating at the end of the yeah, but anyway, thank you.
And being detached from yourself as the messenger.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's so hard to be detached when you feel like you're supposed to be attached in order for God to work here. It's a conundrum.
And that's the difference with Hucksterism. They're always attachment strings, you know, with predetermined outcome strings, you know. And so if somebody is of a discerning mind and heart, they can see that as a manipulation. And that's the opposite of purity of heart.
It's so off-putting.
That's one of the reasons I'm so glad as a Baha'i that we don't accept funds from outside the faith. You know, you can only give funds to the faith if you're a declared believer, and it's because the message is a gift to the world. It's not something that is, you know, supposed to cost someone, you know, money, and that just makes me kind of feel good about it as well. And that's oftentimes the feeling people get. You know, oh, well, you get another person to sign up and then you're going to be able to take money from them. And then even as a Baha'i, this man has never asked me for a dime. treasurer of the assembly.
No, that's not my job.
No. It's really kind of in other words, it all, the whole faith has, every part of it follows this same concept in so many different ways.
Voluntary giving.
Yeah. I mean, he says no coercion.
Everything is freedom.
Yeah, this free giving, it just reminded me of this little folk tale I heard about this very poor man in a village who was just walking his donkey, and he was barefooted and he stumbled across something in the path, and he stopped and picked it up. It was turns out it was a ruby. It was just this beautiful, beautiful gem. And he didn't think too much about it, but he brought it back to his little hut, and he put it on display because he wanted to share it with everyone, have everyone enjoy it. Pretty soon all these people were coming and they wanted it. And finally there was a poor man who admired it, and the person who found it said, well, go ahead, take it, you know, just enjoy it. And the guy said, great. He goes off with the ruby, and the villager thought he'd never see the man again, and a week later he comes back with the ruby and says, here, you take it back. And the villager said, why would you give it back? And the man said, it wasn't the ruby I wanted, it's what was within you to give it to me. That's what I want.
Oh, man.
It's kind of that, you know,
Nice one.
purity of heart that is detectable in a discerning human being.
Wow. That's a great story.
Well, not to go all metaphysical, but are we humans the only creatures that teach?
On purpose?
On
Or by accident?
Well, I guess that's do porpoises teach? I mean, it may seem like a nonsensical question, but it's trying to get at, well, get out of the framework of, you know, teaching is conveying, you know, this something to something. But if, you know, does the whole universe teach us? You know, in its own way, and is that teaching in some way commensurate to the sort of teaching that we're reading about here, which is going forth and spreading the divine fragrances? Yeah. Does a beautiful sunset that moves my soul, you know, is it teaching me? Does it make sense to use that language, or is it sort of pushing the metaphor too far?
Well, Baha'u'llah said every created thing in the whole universe is but a door leading into his knowledge.
There we go.
Was that a plant?
Yeah.
Couldn't have been better.
We agreed to that 1,000.
Well,
19 Mishkos.
it does seem to me that it matters whether it's on purpose. You know, that it's that the one thing that human beings have just a higher level of there's something different. There's something about this purposeful, and if you're doing it right, you're opening up a channel. You know, you're not the source. And when an animal does it, I get the feeling like it's more instinctual. It's more programming in a way. I mean, when you start looking at higher life forms in the animal kingdom, the higher brain functions, you kind of go, wow, there's some spirituality here. But so I don't know, you know, I don't know the behaviors of dolphins and, you know, others that, but it seems like there's a different thing going on there because there isn't an awareness of God. That's the one thing that animals, I don't believe, have is a consciousness of their creator, and we do, and we have an ability to somehow open up to that. We've been given that. So I would think that that's a different kind of teaching. The motives are different, perhaps. I don't know.
Well, I could imagine a bear mama can train its bear cub to function outside the lair, but that doesn't make the mama a hollow reed the way a human begs God to make him a hollow reed.
Also, it's perpetual in nature. It just keeps happening kind of automatically through survival of the fittest and all these things that just sort of continue on. I feel like with humans we have this choice. We have this ability to turn that on or off.
And you said sort of a pre-programming in animals.
And I think we are also programmed in that way, in a lower base nature way as well, because I think we do certain things just sort of automatically. We are animals, you know, in part, but our higher nature is special, I think.
Well, each of the kingdoms has the characteristics of the kingdom below it.
Yeah.
And so that's why we do have animal natures, and that's why, but that doesn't mean we're animals. So the question is, what distinguishes us from an animal? You know, and we have this thing called civilization that you wouldn't find in an animal kingdom. You know, that's what our purpose, to advance civilization. Why do we advance civilization? Because that knowledge, it builds on itself, and we're at the part where we can transcend beyond our nature if we become aware of our spiritual nature. So that intentionality of transcendence, you know, and a realization that we're not just physical beings, you know, we're not trapped by just what our animal nature is. You can be worse than an animal, and you can act like an animal, but then there's something higher than that, which is why the manifestations come and tell us what that higher existence is, and then we strive for that. That's why we're striving for spiritual virtues, because that's higher levels. Self-sacrifice is not something that's natural, you know. So that's
When Abdu'l-Baha describes the universe writ large, and I often come back to this theme, he describes it as two complementary processes. He calls them arcs of descent, arcs of ascent. And one of these arcs is the arc of one way to put it is it's the arc of necessity, it's the arc of compulsion, it's the arc of the laws of physics that mandate that this is what happens given that this happened the moment before and so forth. But that arc of necessity is complemented by an equally important arc, which is voluntary. It's the arc of ascent. It's the arc that of free will, where the movement is not compelled by mathematical laws, but it is a result of a free choice by a morally responsible agency. And somehow these two movements, the movement of necessity and the movement of and voluntary movements are both necessary, to make the world that we live in. They're both components, but it does seem to me that although according to the principle as above so below, there's analogies for everything in all of the kingdoms, that something special about the act of teaching is connected to it being voluntary and something that we could have chosen otherwise.
Boy, every lonely priest I've met who has a dog believes that their dog longs to be in heaven with them when they go to heaven. I mean, they've actually expressed things like that, and I don't know sort of where that comes from. But
This takes me back to my fondness, as all of you know, for we don't know.
The unknowability.
Because we know things about animal nature now that we didn't even 100 years ago. That animals mourn, and so when you said they don't have civilizations, I'm like, that we know of, right? I mean, there's just Oh well,
they build community.
I think animals have plenty of civilization. I mean, look at a flock of birds. They're civilized, they work together, they know exactly what they're doing. We have a family of deer on our property. We see all the time. Does, bucks that come by. About 3 weeks ago, the doe, a yearling, with its mother, slipped between the fence post and the telephone pole on our property. Yearling had no trouble. It just jumped right on through. And then Mom came along and she jumped and got caught between the fence post and the telephone pole. She tried for an hour. I heard these noises. I didn't know what it was. She could not escape, being trapped. And she was exhausted. And I drove up and saw the deer. I went over there, and the yearling, this is the 1-year-old deer, is scared to death of people who would run. It stayed within 15 feet of me at all times. It never left because its mom, whom it clearly was concerned and loved, the fear of me and being close to it was not as powerful as its concern for its mother, who was trapped there between the fence. It would not leave its mother's side. Would not leave its mother's side. That deer stayed trapped for a couple hours until the neighbor came along with the sawzall and cut the fence post. And then the mom was released, and the two then left. And the local police, of course, were also there.
And Jasmine jumped the fence.
And Jasmine jumped the fence to see if she could pick the deer up and pull it over. And she said the deer was too heavy. Civilization. There was love between, I would call it love, between that yearling, that deer, and its mother. I think we're more animal than we might think. I mean, a lot of our characteristics are more animal than a lot of our higher, what we consider higher level is part of life, isn't it? I think.
Well, why don't we pause there for the evening and continue on next week.